Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
5:06, and it's Wednesday morning. All you hump day humpers, thanks for tuning in here to O'Connor and Company. Coming up at 6:05, Mike Van Meter running for Congress against Jerry Connolly. Right in your neighborhood, Julie Gunlock, you Alexandria, Northern Virginia, suburban mom, you.
Yeah.
All right. 6:35, syndicated columnist Cal Thomas. 7:05, Robert Greenway, director of Center for National Defense over at the Heritage Foundation. Talk about the Nato visit here in D.C. And then at 8:35, John Levine. He's the reporter at the New York Post who worked out that exclusive on the White House having those frequent visits from a Parkinson's specialist, neurologist. I'm sure he was just there for,
lunch.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's all coming up. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock. And Julie, speaking of the NATO thing, at a time when we're told that, NATO is under threat and NATO has lost support in the U.S. and, questioning whether NATO's existence is still needed in the world. If you're trying to sell the American people on NATO, maybe just maybe you shouldn't shut down our entire freaking town because of the NATO meeting.
You were in traffic yesterday.
Oh,
were you?
my Lord. It wasn't as I had a meeting downtown around a dinner meeting around 6:30 last night. It wasn't as bad for me because I was coming from northeast-ish.
Yeah.
But for those who were coming from Alexandria or Northwest or Southwood or anywhere west of Capitol Hill, oh my God!
Well,
just an absolute nightmare yesterday in
you
DC.
mentioned this. It was dinner, so I assume you're heading in around 5 or 6 or whatever. I leave the studio not immediately, but I'm basically
around 9:30 in the morning, 9:15 in the morning.
Yeah, and I'm on my way home, and the traffic had started then.
Already.
395 was a mess. Now I was going against it. I was trying to get out of town, but there's a couple areas where over by the Lincoln Memorial crossing, it was a mess, and I thought, oh my God. And then when you said I had a dinner, I thought, oh,
it was pretty awful.
Ugh.
Honestly, if there's ever been a reason to disband this archaic institution known as NATO, now is the time because of this.
It was funny. You said that you came from a direction that was a little bit easier, but some of the guests came from the more difficult parts, and they look like they've been through a war.
They look like they had served on the front lines in NATO. In World War III.
DC traffic. For those who are listening sort of outside the DC area, it is remarkable. Whenever there's those polls that say DC has the worst traffic in the world, nobody's surprised.
Yeah.
No, this is not news.
Well, and I still contend that part of the reason is the lack of alternate routes. Like, for instance, if you are in Northern Virginia and you need to get to DC, you're screwed. There's no tunnels.
There's just a couple bridges.
There's 2 bridges, maybe a third, and that's it. It's over. And there hasn't been an expansion. When was the last new bridge built across the Potomac?
Yeah. And
like 50, 60, 70 years, I think.
I'm sort of one of those people that thinks they can always beat things. Like when I put it in my maps, and I'm like, no, I know a shorter way.
I know better.
It drives my husband crazy because my husband will just patiently go along, whereas I'm like, no. If you get off here, and you remember that scene in Broadcast News with Holly Hunter, right? She gets in the taxi cab, and she's directing him, and he's like, I kind of do this for a living. That is me, and it's frustrating because you almost never beat it. You never do.
Yeah. So I don't know what to tell you. If you don't have to be in D.C. until when is this thing over? Friday? This NATO summit? I think
so.
It's Friday.
Yeah.
Don't come to D.C. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's also, by the way, Congress started. It was back in session yesterday too. Mm-hmm. So it was
extra busy.
I mean, it's fun when D.C.'s busy. Yeah. Obviously. By the way, add to the mix that we're in the middle of summer, so there's a lot of tourist traffic. There's a lot of tourist buses.
And it is so hot here. It is so hot here that, I mean...
How hot is it?
Nobody smells good.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry. That's a Harry Reid thing, remember? He used to say, you can smell the tourists. So... It was a fun time in D.C. yesterday with the NATO traffic. as President Biden, by the way, was delivering teleprompted remarks to the NATO summit and giving out award. Why was he giving out like American like medals of honor-ish? They're not actual medals of honor.
Yeah.
Presidential medals of freedom
to not done?
Foreign dignitaries and stuff. It just looked weird, but
it did look weird.
It is. I like NATO. I got nothing against NATO. NATO's a good thing. We're like I said, we're going to have a guest on later in the program at 7:05.
NATO's about to be,
Greenway.
About to be destroyed because of Trump, right?
That's
the
what
guy
we
who
keep hearing.
strengthened it.
Biden bragged last night about, when I took office, only 5 of the NATO countries were paying their fair share, but now it's up to 25. It's like,
why?
Gee, who made that happen?
Yeah.
What an ass.
He is.
But then, it's interesting. I've been doing a deep dive into the 80s. I think I might write a book about my experience in let me just summarize my book. Best decade in the history of mankind.
Are we not so lucky?
Lucky.
Our Middle Ages, it stinks to live right now, okay? But man, we had it good.
The fact that we were our age in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been, like, if you've noticed on my X account, every other day I share something from the 80s.
Right.
Because it truly was the greatest decade.
It really
and it was the most consequential decade.
Yep.
And we lived in a time where we had Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and John Paul II as basically standing astride Western civilization. Fighting against the evil empire of the Soviet Union. So yesterday I was doing a whole thing, and I was looking at the music of the 80s, and specifically 99 Luftballons. I know, I'm going down a rabbit trail.
Great, yes.
Great, and for those of you who don't know or don't remember, it was a West German song. And it was in German, but somehow it became a hit in America.
But they translated it.
They did, but it was weird. But yes, I liked the.
Did you sing along?
I liked
German
the
version?
original German. Yes, exactly.
Sound like Biden.
Kind of. But the song is about a nuclear war that was erroneously started because they had released 99 red balloons, and that it's erroneously triggered a nuclear war, which of course would have never happened. And spoiler alert, it was sort of based,
yes, but
completely fraudulent premise.
Sure, but can we also this was also the era of Threads, remember, and the day after, and all those nuke movies.
The day after, the miniseries.
I think I've talked to you about this. If you really want to get freaked out, watch Threads, which is a lot more. My parents were like, you can't watch the day after because a note came home from school. That's how serious
it was. So devastating.
Don't let your children watch this. But my parents were like, but there's an alternative version on the BBC, and it's much more scary. So let's watch that one. Anyway, go on.
And War Games with Matthew Broderick.
Course,
There were all of these movies and all of these things about the tension of what would happen. And by the way, we were told that it was because Ronald Reagan was such a psychopathic maniac that he was going to trigger World War III and nuclear Armageddon and everything.
We need to be nice to the Soviets.
But given all of that, it's like you hear Biden. I'm going to bring it back around to today's news, I promise.
Balloons.
Yesterday, what about
balloons?
The 99 balloons. Well, because there was this idea that we were all living on the razor's edge, that, the release of 99 red balloons could trigger a nuclear Armageddon, or Matthew Broderick hacking into the Pentagon would trigger a nuclear Armageddon, all of these things. But we were actually, this was a common conversation on a regular basis at a time when Europe was literally divided by armies, standing armies, and missiles pointing at each other, east and west. And yesterday, Joe Biden has the nerve to stand up there and say, NATO has never been more important than it is right now. The existential threat of freedom and Western civilization depends on NATO. It's like, dude. What? Europe is like freaking Disney World right now compared to what it was in the 80s.
That's right.
And when they use this kind of rhetoric, anybody with a brain says, no, it's not.
Right.
You're trying to sell me something that clearly is the stuff of infomercials. Hold that thought. 5:15 WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes. First on the fives with Jamie Whitten in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center.
WMAL. Making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Later this morning on the Chris Plant Show, New York Times obituary. James Inhofe, senator who denied climate change, dies at 89. 9 a.m. on WMAL.
Yeah. Music like this and Phoebe Cates walking out of that swimming pool in Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Put that up.
We'll
on
never
Twitter.
have a better decade. Hey, remember when I asked Julie to hold that thought a minute ago?
It's gone.
Held it like a sieve.
Showing my age.
Which brings us to Dr. Tom Pitts, a neurologist.
Nice segue.
Who focuses on people's brain issues. This is quite possibly the most devastating medical analysis of Joe Biden and what appears to be a condition that likens itself to Parkinson's, if it is not full-on Parkinson's disease. Dr. Tom Pitts appeared on NBC News Now, which is their streaming news service. Right. This guy did not appear on MSNBC. He did not appear on the Today Show. He did not appear on NBC Nightly News. But, I guess a little credit to the Peacock. They did this interview and then buried it. But there was a X account called End Wokeness. Whoever runs it does a great job finding videos, finding things on End Wokeness. And they found this, they published it, and you need to hear it.
You noticed anything that gives you a red flag as a doctor?
Oh, yeah, I see him 20 times a day in clinic. I mean, it's ironic because he has just such classic features of neurodegeneration. I mean, word-finding difficulties, and that's not, I couldn't find the word. That's from degeneration of the word retrieval area.
He's also overcome stuttering, though. Could that be part of that?
I love you. One thing to note as we listen to this is the anchor constantly trying to jump in because he realizes, oh, my God, this guy is actually...
I'm so fired.
Yeah, right. So he says, well, he has overcome stuttering. And what he's going to say, no, stuttering is very different.
They used that 4 years ago.
Right.
They used that. They said, and they made conservatives out to be monsters for bringing it up.
Jake Tapper, who I'm told is supposed to get so much credit now because he's noticed what we all noticed years ago. Jake Tapper threw Laura Trump off the air because Laura Trump said, yeah, I think, and Jake Tapper was like, how do you think young children with stutters feel when you make fun of the president?
What is wrong with you?
Yes.
Yeah.
But another report came out yesterday that Biden at a fundraiser couldn't think of the word for veteran. It was a small fundraiser. And then he asked the people in the room, help me out. What's the word I'm looking for? I mean, someone who served in the Army and the Navy. And people in the room said, you mean a veteran? Yeah, that's the word. That's not a stutter. That is not a stutter. Okay, so we'll let Dr. Pitts continue here. But I won't interrupt it again, but pay close attention to the anchor constantly trying to salvage this and save Joe Biden.
No, this is not a palatal issue or a speech discrepancy, which is very different from a lemino dysfunction, actual word retrieval, where you pick a similar question or talk around the issue, plus the rigidity, monotone voice.
Wait, go back to that, the rigidity. What do you mean?
Rigidity, loss of arm swing, standing up lordically. You notice when he turns, it's kind of en bloc turning. It's not a quick turn. So that's one of the hallmarks of Parkinsonism is rigidity and bradykinesia, slow movement. And he has that hallmark, especially with the low voice that said was a cold hypophonia. A small monotone voice like this over time is a hallmark of Parkinsonism. I could have diagnosed him from across the mall.
Here are some of the symptoms from Parkinson's. We just had him up there on the screen. If we can put him back. What about the movement? Some people have pointed out the way he walks. Sometimes it's not very fast, small steps. Is that something that is common in people who are battling a disease like Parkinson's?
Yeah, it's a hallmark. Shuffling gait, we call that, so little steps. Loss of arm swing from the rigidity. When we walk, we have a nice cadence. You notice he doesn't really swing his arms. And en bloc turning, meaning he kind of pivots around his foot. If you said, hey, President Biden, he wouldn't go like this. So, yeah.
But I also know.
Can I just, we're going to listen to a little bit more of this in a moment, but I want to point out, none of this should be an indictment of somebody who has Parkinson's. John Paul II famously was a public figure and a very effective one, the Pope, now St. John Paul II, with Parkinson's. And I thought he was a beacon of hope and sort of, it sent the message that even when you are diagnosed with a devastating diagnosis like this that is incurable, you still bring great worth and value to our society. No life is expendable. And honestly, I think that Joe Biden, if they were smart and they were honest and they were transparent, they could have actually, but this isn't about Joe Biden having Parkinson's anymore. This is about the cover-up.
And again, if Biden and his family weren't such a bunch of narcissists, they could have parlayed this sympathy into support for Kamala. But again, they're crazy narcissistic.
Yes.
They can't step out of themselves.
Cravenly power hungry as well. And that's really what this is about. So this analysis from Dr. Pitts is less about, he's got Parkinson's, that's it, he's done, he can't be president. No, it's about how they have been lying.
Yes.
It's about how they have been
about
covering
that.
it up. Yes, they do. We'll get to that from Dr. Pitts in just a moment. It's 5:23.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:36. It's O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in this Wednesday morning. I want everyone to know that Julie Gunlock is picking on me. Just FYI. At 6:05, Mike Van Meter running for Congress against Jerry Connolly. See, she didn't deny it. At 6:35, Cal Thomas will be our guest. At 7:05, Robert Greenway of Heritage Foundation on the NATO summit. And then at 8:35, John Levine. He's the New York Post reporter who sort of unearthed the fact that a Parkinson's specialist and neurologist visited the White House 8 times over the course of the last 8 months. And Karine Jean-Pierre Still, the White House communications director, still has not answered a very simple question. Were these visits related to Joe Biden? She can't say yes or no to that.
No.
She is incapable.
Apparently the
of it.
White House just sees regular Parkinson's patients, just military men and women who have Parkinson's.
And it's a privacy issue.
Yeah. Right.
So Dr. Tom Pitts, again, as we pick it up somewhat where we left off, he is a specialist and neurologist. He treats Parkinson's patients. That's what he does. He was on NBC News Now.
And he will never be on again.
No, he won't.
Lots of arm swing, standing up lordically. You notice when he turns, it's kind of en bloc turning. It's not a quick turn. So
everything he's describing here.
Oh.
Like how many times have we seen him as he's walking away from the podium, a reporter shouts a question, he stops, and then it's this slow sort of creepy pivot instead of like you don't look over your shoulder like I just did and pulled my face away from the microphone.
I always think of Poltergeist, I think 3 or 2, with that tall, weird, he had very slow, deliberate motions, but so I didn't know the ghost had Parkinson's, but anyway,
and the
that's what it reminds me.
walking with his hands at the side and the
no swinging the arms,
right?
The strange gait. Yes.
Listen, and again, by the way, because the White House. Here's the important thing to recognize, because it's anyone who finds this tawdry and sort of gross that there are specialists on television trying to diagnose the president from afar. And that I would prefer this not be the situation, but it's because this White House is covering something up.
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
They are acting like they are covering something
about
up.
That. Look, the president, there has to be extra attention on the president's health. I don't have any sympathy. And when people say this is tawdry or this is gross, no. This is the president. You know, I think yesterday, I think you were doing an interview where you talked about you have a daughter who's serving in the military. You know, she is under his command.
Right.
You know, I live in this country.
That's
like,
right.
I don't want someone who is having health problems being in charge of this country. It's completely legitimate to assess the health of the president.
Yeah, and they're covering it up. Is the problem? And with regard to the military, this is a pattern of behavior because this is exactly what our Secretary of Defense did, and oh, by the way, got away with it. Isn't it interesting that the president gave the Secretary of Defense a pass? He should have been fired.
It's a good point.
But he didn't fire the man who went AWOL, did not notify anyone that he was suffering from cancer and undergoing treatment, and kept it a secret. And the one man who could have fired him for that dereliction is the president of the United States, who gave him a pass. I wonder why he gave him a pass.
Yeah,
because he's doing the exact same thing.
And the guy went AWOL when his deputy was on vacation.
Right.
I mean, it was just egregious what occurred.
Back to Dr. Pitts.
That's one of the hallmarks of Parkinsonism is rigidity and bradykinesia, slow movement. And he has that hallmark, especially with the low voice that said was a cold, hypophonia. A small monotone voice like this over time is a hallmark of Parkinsonism.
How many times have we been talking about this? I mean, I've been mentioning the fact that he always appears at a podium with microphones. The people who are introducing him or other people on the agenda, they all use the microphones at the podium. The microphones are perfectly capable of picking up any other speaker. Then he gets up there and they got a little karaoke mic for him, a little handheld mic like he's Tom Jones singing Delilah as his grand finale of his concert. He doesn't use it to walk away from the podium. He's still standing at the same damn podium with the same damn mics, but he has to use a mic right up against his mouth like this and they up the gain on it so that they can hear him. They couldn't do that at the debate, and that's why suddenly everyone's like, oh, my God, what happened to his voice?
Right.
This is his voice. It's what his voice has been. They've been hiding it.
Yes.
It's a cover-up.
The cover-up.
The story is less now about the president's health as it is about the White House cover-up, including Kamala Harris as a participant in that cover-up.
I could have diagnosed him from across the mall.
Here are some of the symptoms from Parkinson's. We just had him up there on the screen. If we can put him back. What about the movement? Some people have pointed out the way he walks. Sometimes it's not very fast, small steps. Is that something that is common in people who are battling a disease like Parkinson's?
Yeah, it's a hallmark. Shuffling gait, we call that, so little steps. Loss of arm swing from the rigidity. When we walk, we have a nice cadence. You notice he doesn't really swing his arms. And end block turning, meaning he kind of pivots around his foot. If you said, hey, President Biden, he wouldn't go like this. So, yeah.
But I also know, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it's very hard to diagnose Parkinson's, isn't it? It's not simple. I mean, I've heard that it can be.
It's one of the easier movement disorders to diagnose, actually.
Right.
But it's so clinic. There's very little other. And I'm a Democrat. I always say about this.
Right.
It's just like, this guy is not a hard case.
But I've had relatives who have gone through neurological issues, and I've heard that sometimes Parkinson's is not very easy to nail. You have to take a lot of tests.
He's trying so hard.
This kid, he's like, I just put like a down payment on an apartment. I don't want to lose this job.
Rachel Maddow was going to be so ticked off at me.
I'm so dead.
Yeah.
I wonder if he left immediately, just like got in his car, drove home.
By the way, the doctor is, I've actually encountered people who do have Parkinson's. I have a rough tangential familiarity with this. It isn't the easiest thing to diagnose early on. And what they do is they go through a lot of tests to eliminate things before they land on Parkinson's. Because, by the way, the solution is you go on some pretty heavy-duty medications.
I do love, though, that after that doctor lays out very specific things that Biden has been showing, like he called it the pivoting, the way that he doesn't move his arms, the low voice,
gait,
the whispering. He goes through a list of like 15 things that are markers of Parkinson's, and then the anchor goes, it's hard to spot.
Right. And if you saw the video, the doctor sort of rolls his eyes and goes, oh, actually, this is pretty easy, actually. And in fact, he goes, listen to this.
Early on, if you're just presented with like hallucinations, that could be a variety of things, or just the cognitive problems. That could be Alzheimer's versus Parkinsonism, and that becomes a little nebulous. But once you start manifesting the hallmark motor symptoms, slow movement, rigidity, mass facies, hypophonia. I mean, if a med student did not pick Parkinson's on the test, they'd be remediated.
Let me ask
I would fail at that student
and he
in
says
medical
a student.
School.
He's like, this doesn't take someone who's been in the field for 20 years.
Yeah, it's and again, I want to reiterate, this is a cover-up. This is a cover-up that's being exposed before our eyes, and this is so many. Remember when they made a big deal about the fact that he was going to be wearing different shoes now when he walked, and nobody thought to say, really, why? What's going on there? What's the deal with the shoes?
Why do you need balance shoes?
Yeah. And, well, all right, a little bit more on this. And again, we're now going to get to this Democrat doctor explaining why it's important for him to be honest and truthful about this, which flies right in the face of what we're seeing from this White House. That's coming up in just a moment. Keep it here for that.
But once you start manifesting the hallmark motor symptoms, slow movement, rigidity, mass facies, hypophonia. I mean, if a med student did not pick Parkinson's on the test, they'd be remediated.
So let me ask you, you're a Democrat, you're a doctor. You sound like you're frustrated with what the White House is saying.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because, I'm an American before everything. And I look at it and say, when I used to see Russia, Soviet Union, North Korea, when they just make outrageous things, like when North Korea can't keep the lights on and they say, oh, it was some faulty power thing. I kind of hate that kind of stuff. They had 4 years, my own party had 4 years to find, this was a wreck in slow motion. And they had 4 years to find out of 350 Americans, one person that could take the place. And here we are the day before school trying to do the homework and replace a guy who's got a neurodegenerative disease.
How awkward do you think it was for this man, Dr. Tom Pitts, to leave the NBC News studios after this segment, likening all of this to the Soviet Union? The anchor says, well, thank you, doctor. More on Pravda tonight,
Right.
NBC is part of the problem here, but he called them out. It was beautiful.
Duct taping Rachel Maddow to the chair so she didn't go out and kill him. Right. But he's absolutely right. Yeah. This is the kind of thing that, non-hyper political Americans are all going to go, what is wrong with you people? Right. It's obvious.
Yeah, and again, the issue here is it is so obvious. He just diagnosed the president to a T based on his behaviors and what he's been exhibiting, and they're still lying. They're still covering it up. Now, a friend of this program, Dr. Marty McCary, who is not an expert on this like Dr. Pitts is, but again, a physician witnessing this has got to reach certain conclusions. He had a different take on Fox.
And I think when you look at the constellation of symptoms, the slowing, the confusion, the sundowning, the very odd movements that people recognize from a loved one that may be suffering from dementia or one of the Alzheimer's related conditions, people recognize those. And what we likely are witnessing is age-related dementia, which doesn't get better. It gets worse over time.
What observations as a doctor have you made, especially of that debate performance?
Well, look, there was times of intense confusion, and it's hard to make a curbside diagnosis from a distance. But when you look at the shuffling, the slow motion movement, what we call dyskinesia, when a hand goes out very slow for a handshake and that kind of very slow movements, those are signs of somebody with cognitive slowing. And if I put a medical student of mine in front of the president and said, here's a standardized patient, do an assessment. If they came back and said, here, there's a normal cognition, there's no diagnosis, that patient would fail the exam. We're clearly witnessing dyskinesias and signs of age-related dementia.
Now, this is all, by the way, layered on top of the fact that Karine Jean-Pierre and John Kirby and the comm staff at the White House continue to try to tell you that everything is fine and there's nothing wrong. Which brings us to this last item. Kevin O'Connor, no relation, the doctor, the personal physician of the president, who also, by the way, has some shady investments, apparently, according to James Comer, the oversight chairman. He put out a letter further explaining the visits from a neurologist and all of those things. Here's one of the bullet point items. There were no findings which would be consistent with any cerebellar or other central neurological disorder, such as stroke, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ascending lateral sclerosis. That's the bullet point item in the doctor. And it sounds very science-y, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds very doctor-y.
Yeah.
There's one problem with it. What did I say there? Stroke, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ascending lateral sclerosis. Here's the problem. There is no such thing as ascending lateral sclerosis. It's not a condition. Now, people are thinking that he meant to say amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
Okay.
But the doctor did not say that. The doctor said something called ascending lateral sclerosis, which is not a thing.
Wow.
Which leads us to one of three conclusions. Number one, this was not written by the doctor. It was written by a staffer trying to sound science-y and cover this up. Number two, the doctor's name was just affixed to it, whoever signed it, which is kind of connected to number one. Or number three, the president's physician doesn't know a whole lot about a medical condition like this. But that's kind of problematic,
well,
too.
And we've been, look, it's to me, it's a combination of them. But but we know because of COVID that the Democrats would just throw out big scientific words and say, you're too dumb to understand.
That's right.
Follow the science, whatever Fauci says, whatever smart scientist, whatever the credentialed class says, you should shut up and listen. Mm-hmm. So they use that method a lot. But also that doctor, I mean, he's signing off on things. He's part of this
How
cover-up.
long can Kevin O'Connor go without actually
also,
appearing and answering questions?
He's not a specialist in this.
Clearly. One big takeaway here, kids, if you're trying to fake a note from your parents to get out of school tomorrow, don't say that you've got ascending lateral sclerosis. People might be able to see through it, and they'll know that the letter's a forgery. Kind of like what it appears we got from the White House on this. The cover-up continues. We'll talk about it. John Levine, by the way, the writer for the New York Post, who uncovered the visits from the specialist at the White House. He'll be joining us at 8:35. Take a look at this video that we just played for you. It's Dr. Tom Pitts on NBC News now.
Devastating.
100% devastating. Find it, share it on your social media, keep it out there, because NBC News is trying to bury it. It's 5:54.